Welcome, everyone. We'll begin shortly. Give everyone a few minutes to join in. Thanks for joining, everyone. We're going to give people another minute or so to hop on, and then we'll get started. Thanks for joining. For those who just joined, we're giving people another minute or so to hop on, and then we will get started. All right, welcome everyone. I know it's not a full theater 5, but I think we can go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Crozier. I am the Communications Director here at Main Street Alliance, and just want to welcome you to this important conversation today. I'm going to go over a few logistics before we begin. And we're going to have the Q&A feature open for you. You can put questions in throughout the presentation, but we'll have 15 to 20 minutes at the end to address those questions. But as you're thinking of them, as the conversation is flowing and you're thinking of questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function to put those questions in, and we'll moderate those at the end of the session. And if you are listening and you're a part of the media and you're interested in doing a follow-up interview, we'll make sure that you get that contact information afterwards as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to our Government Affairs Director, Didier Trinh. Welcome, Didier.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you all for joining this important conversation today. Main Street small businesses are the mainstay of our jobs, our economy, and our community life. They are also the most trusted institution in our country. Yet, since January 2020, more than a quarter of the country's small businesses have shuttered. And according to Opportunity Insight's economy trackers, as of the end of last year, small business revenue is down by 32%. COVID-19 continues to present the greatest threat in generations to the country's more than 30 million small businesses, particularly businesses in Black and Brown communities, micro businesses, and businesses in rural areas. Amid this crisis, we have an opportunity to rethink entrepreneurship in the United States, focusing on support for the very small businesses that contribute opportunity, vitality, and equity to our communities. We at Main Street Alliance applaud the Biden-Harris administration for placing true small businesses at the center of their Build Back Better agenda. The administration's focus on a federally coordinated approach to combating COVID, together with a comeback package for Main Street businesses and entrepreneurs, is key to putting small businesses on track toward recovery. Small businesses have a unique role to play in addressing racial equity, public health and safety, and climate change. We've convened this conversation today to focus on what should be prioritized to support small businesses over the first 3 months of this new administration. Main Street Alliance, in consultation with our members across the nation, have identified 4 priorities: protecting and rebuilding businesses devastated by COVID, focusing on hardest hit businesses and those excluded from earlier relief programs; addressing capital, credit, and business development needs of the country's smallest businesses; leveling the playing field for small businesses by supporting a safety net for small business owners and their employees; and reining in monopolies and reversing corporate concentration. I'm pleased to be joined today for this timely discussion by Jessica Fulton, Vice President at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, where she engages in research and analysis to identify policies that advance the socioeconomic status of the Black community. Currently, she's focused on research on policies to support the needs of Black communities in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to joining the Joint Center, she served as External Relations Director at the Washington Center for Equitable Growth. ReShonda Young is a longtime Main Street Alliance leader and board member, as well as the founder of Popcorn Heaven and the recent Bank of Jabez, a community development financial institution in Iowa, working to provide investment and technical assistance to minority and women-owned businesses in the Waterloo community. Kriss Marion is the owner of Circle M Farm, a bed and breakfast and small family farm located in rural Blanchardville, Wisconsin. In addition to being a small business owner and farmer, Kriss is a rural county supervisor and was a Wisconsin State Assembly candidate. She has also focused on boosting opportunities for farmers markets in all tiny towns. Thank you all again for joining today, and let's get started. Even before COVID happened, there were existing barriers to financial support that affect minority and women business owners. We saw these exacerbated by the pandemic, and the COVID relief programs were put through banks that have a history of redlining. A survey last fall from Main Street Alliance and Color of Change found that nearly half of Black-owned businesses were saying they would have to close without additional support, compared to a third of businesses overall. And women-owned businesses had to wait longer, and in some cases were 10 times less likely to hear in a couple of days from their lenders compared to their male counterparts. In that same survey, we saw overall among owners who applied for any of the government aid programs, whether that be the Paycheck Protection Program, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or the Employee Retention Credit, only 58% said they received the full amount they applied for, and that Black men and women were twice as likely to not receive what they applied for. This disparity in access to capital has had real-life consequences. While waiting for economic assistance, people of color and women owners were more likely across the board to reduce hours, pay, or make other financial cuts. ReShonda and Kriss, what was your experience with the COVID relief programs?
Okay, I'll start. So I personally did not apply for PPP or go to a bank for anything. I've had really bad experiences with the banking industry. And so I chose personally not to subject myself to potentially the same treatment I've had before. However, I did assist a lot of other business owners as they've tried to navigate those programs. And what I found was that oftentimes the small businesses, they just weren't prepared for all of the things that the lenders were looking for. That was the first thing. And then the process was very difficult for them. They didn't have a lot of guidance on how to access the programs. The EIDL grant, that was the $1,000 per employee. That was one that so many people had no clue even existed. And that one I did apply for because I didn't have to go to the bank. And it was just a network of us that were calling other small business owners and saying, hey, do you know about this program? Do you know about this program? And helping them fill out the paperwork. But none of that assistance was coming from the people that you would think it would come from, like, either the banks or the government. And even as people have, a few people, I say, have gotten the grants here in terms of small business owners. When I say a few people, they've not known how to navigate actually getting those PPP loans forgiven. And so, in a lot of instances, the banks haven't said anything about the paperwork they need to fill out. They're just assuming that these loans are forgiven. And it's like, no, they're not. And so as much as possible, especially with the network of small business owners that I work with, just trying to fill in that gap. But when you don't have somebody to help you fill in that gap, what do you do? And so locally, we're just trying to, as much as possible, boots on the ground, face to face with small business owners, making sure that they know what programs are out there, how to access them, and once you do access them, how to get these loans actually forgiven.
Thanks, ReShonda. Kriss, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with these relief programs?
Yeah, I would really echo ReShonda's two main words were navigate and network. I think navigating the system is the biggest challenge. Rurally, we don't even have internet to fill out all of the forms. So I am fortunate enough in my tiny town of 825 to have a community bank here, and that bank did reach out to the handful of businesses that we have. Our county also has an economic development director who could focus on, for a couple weeks, getting information out to people. She personally went and sat with her laptop and business owners. And I also had business owners from my town come out to my farm and sit with my computer and enter in the information. So if you weren't fortunate enough to know someone and have someone reaching out to you, and you were a small business owner who didn't follow all these things, you were out of luck. We personally closed our bed and breakfast because it's in our home. And we got a $2,500 grant, which was very nice, but it doesn't make up for $40,000, in lost income. So I think the networks are key, and I think that what we're seeing is that for certain urban communities and for rural communities, the networks are not as strong as they might be in a very robust Main Street program or something like that. So we really rely on luck to hear word about what's going on with the programs. And I do think that the non-payable, the loans that you don't have to pay back, that's a real, a lot of people didn't even apply for that because they just didn't believe in it. And so we have a very great SBA outreach here. And I can see on Facebook that the people who are networked with the SBA folks are moving forward. They've made renovations. They're keeping their faces out there. So those experts, those technical experts, they really matter. They really count. And as much as we can fund those experts and not have to rely on just NGOs who are just trying to make it work, we will have stronger business communities in places that are a little bit impoverished or sparser.
Thanks, Kriss. I think you've just given us a new catchy slogan to use at SBA: Navigate and Network. I like that. Also encouraging to hear that at least where you are, SBA seems to have a fairly robust outreach system in place. Now we just need to expand that around the country. Jessica, what do these challenges mean for small businesses in these communities, as well as what they mean for the overall economic health of these communities?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to be part of the discussion today. I just listening to ReShonda and Kriss, it is very disappointing, but I will say that like a lot of what they talked about kind of shows up in the data. The frustrating piece is that there were folks involved in these discussions as these programs were developed who knew that the way that these were structured would prevent certain groups of borrowers from getting the support that they need, right? And so this sets back business owners of color, this sets back women business owners, this sets back folks in rural communities. And I think one of the things, I've been paying attention to data from the Reimagine Main Street project for public-private strategies, and they said that just 16% of Black and 19% of Asian American and 23% of Latino-owned small businesses are operating as usual. That's compared to 36% of white-owned businesses. And I think a lot of that has to do with exactly what ReShonda talked about in terms of not not wanting to deal with banks in dealing with this PPP loan process. One of the things that was really frustrating to us was seeing that the study that the National Community Reinvestment Coalition did that showed that Black and Latino borrowers have actually been steered away from the products that we think are the ones that are going to be most helpful. And so, like, by not even entering into that, entering into the situation where you're going to be steered towards like putting a mortgage out on your home rather than applying for a PPP loan, like you're preventing doing some harm to yourself. And I think that you know, because people can't or haven't felt comfortable kind of with the kinds of support that the government is offering, we're losing jobs, we're losing money in our economy, we're losing businesses. And those are things that, like, you know, we actually should be supporting and encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship and building up communities. And I think so far, policymakers just haven't done a great job there.
Thanks, Jessica. And I know later on in the discussion, we'll talk a little bit more about supports that are needed, not just right now during COVID-19, but to enable the small business economy to recover fully and to eventually thrive again. During the pandemic, we've seen the impacts disproportionately affecting women, whether that's small business owners or employees. The need for a care economy is clearer than ever. Investments in childcare, healthcare, paid leave, and more would go a long way to support women in the economy as well as women-owned businesses. In the last jobs report, we saw that women accounted for all of the job losses, 156,000, while men actually gained 16,000 jobs. And so I want to turn back to Jessica and ask you what type of supports would be helpful to tackle inequality like gender inequality for small business owners and their employees.
Yeah, I think there are a couple pieces to this. I think that to me, it's obvious, but we have to support employers by supporting programs like paid leave and childcare and healthcare. And it's partially, and I think a lot of people discuss this in terms of like excellent employers who want to do right by their employees and they want to make sure that their employees are provided for. And these are also the kinds of programs that make it easier for women who still bear the brunt of caregiving responsibilities in homes to go to work. But I think there's also a strong case to be made for why we need these programs to support people who are self-employed, right? Like a large number of business owners actually don't employ other people, but like they still need to be able to make sure that their kids are taken care of. They still need healthcare. They might need to take time off from time to time, which all of us at some point do have care responsibilities, and like they may not be able to afford to stop operating for a week or two to take care of themselves. And so I think we need to be supporting these programs for those folks as well. And there's a second piece to this that's about supporting women, supporting care workers. So the jobs that were lost, actually, it was all Black and Latino women, right? And because of occupational segregation, because of the way that the workforce is structured, the people who are doing a lot of these care work jobs, the childcare jobs, the like home health aides, all of that stuff, it's primarily women of color, right? And so we have to make sure that those jobs are good jobs, that those people are able to like earn enough to make a living and take care of themselves and their families. That gives us, I think people call it building out the care infrastructure. That gives us the kind of quality care that allows us to trust that we can make sure that there are folks who take care of our kids and our parents and our friends, right? So that we can go to work without being concerned about if people are going to be okay. And so I think, that strengthens women's role in the workforce in a couple ways. Like, that allows people to go to work, and that allows women who are working in these jobs to contribute to the economy in a greater way.
Thanks, Jessica. And to your last point, also, I think very positive to see that in the Biden administration's rescue plan, there is a real focus on childcare and childcare providers and that entire industry that has been suffering over the past year. So we remain hopeful that this will be part of the package that gets through Congress. Similarly, Kriss, you're a mom who homeschooled your children. What are some of the ways you see rural economies being supported through these kinds of investments?
Yeah, I'm in my 50s, so it was a different time when I had the luxury of staying home with my kids when they were in grade school. It was not easy, but we really did um, believe. I had always freelanced, and so it made sense for me to continue freelancing and educate my kids when they were very young at home. Um, we know that there is a crisis of early childcare, early development education. We just can't get quality education to 0 to 3, 3 to 6, and the ripple effects of that are really destructive in our economy, and just for our social fabric. And so that is a crisis that we see in the countryside. What's going on with childcare is just bizarre. Childcare workers don't get paid enough, and yet childcare is too expensive for most folks who families now are working 2 and 3 jobs each, to make it. I know school teachers in the country, a lot of our school teachers are bartenders just to make ends meet. And if they have a child, where is childcare? Where does that fit in? Our childcare providers are often uninspected. They may be lovely at home places that I have sent my grandson to an uninspected on-farm childcare that was lovely. But the issues are so insurmountable about getting everybody paid enough, getting everybody cared for adequately, and making sure it's affordable. We can see why other countries have taken this on from a government side. And I think we need to own up to the fact that we need to do the same. We're not gonna, there's just no way to solve the problem without subsidies. And in the meantime, in rural places, we have workforce shortages. We can't get enough people to enter the workforce to power our Main Street businesses. We can't attract factories or manufacturing because we don't have the employees, and we won't have employees until we have enough childcare. So keeping people here living, working, and playing in the countryside depends on solutions, subsidized solutions to problems like childcare and housing and healthcare.
All very good points. Thank you, Kriss. Let's move on to the larger issue of access to capital. Beyond this COVID crisis, we do have an opportunity to rethink entrepreneurship in the US, away from favoring mid-range businesses to focusing support on true small businesses, including micro businesses. COVID has revealed and exacerbated pre-existing barriers to capital, such as small business redlining, usury credit rates and practices, and lack of other supports and technical assistance needed to launch and grow a successful business. These are even more pronounced for minority-owned and women-owned businesses, micro businesses, and rural businesses. ReShonda, what policy changes do you recommend to address some of these longstanding capital access inequities?
Sure, great question, Didier. The SBA, there needs to be an expansion of SBA programs and authorities that actually serve minority-owned and micro businesses and other underserved businesses, such as the rural areas, like where Kriss is at. And so I work with a lot of, actually mostly, minority and women-owned micro businesses, actually. And no, and for example, when the PPP came out, if the SBA was actually in charge of actually providing this funding instead of them having to go to banks where they generally don't have a relationship, that would have been so helpful just to have the SBA there instead of just sending these business owners to banks or telling them that they need to go to the banks. There just needs to be a thorough examination of just SBA lending, technical assistance, other programs, and assessing their effectiveness for supporting just the very small businesses. And then there's the community advantage that needs to be made permanent. Instead of it being, a trial type of a deal, it needs to be made permanent for small business owners. Another issue that has been near and dear to me is the enforcement of collection of data. With Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank Act, that's created so that we could monitor and assess the access to capital, and that's not being enforced. Fortunately, at this point, I was part of a lawsuit that has compelled the CFPB to enforce that. And we're in the process of going through these steps to make sure that this data starts getting collected. But that's a really big deal. Until there's actual data that's being collected, people can say, oh, well, that's not really accurate. But when there's data there, you can't argue with the data. So that's a really big deal. And then just creating new public entity that's going to expand access to capital for these really small businesses. That's going to be a really big deal. A lot of banks don't even want to deal with loans for less than $50,000. I work with a lot of people who you give them a $10,000 loan, and it's going to make a tremendous difference in them being able to stock up product and actually get their business moving and off the ground. Well, a lot of banks, they're not even going to deal with you for less than 50. And oftentimes that's not even what they need. So there just needs to be a lot of policy changes, some things that really support small business owners. I'll say for myself personally, some of these things really do need to be monitored, because just to get an $84,000 loan for my business, I had to put up more than $300,000 in real estate assets from my rentals in order to secure an $84,000 loan. I mean, that's ridiculous. And oftentimes, small business owners may not have that much in assets to be able to put up. And how fair is that, though, to have to put up assets that are worth more than 3 times what the lending is that you're trying to get? So just a lot of policy changes need to be made that address small and micro businesses.
Thank you so much, ReShonda. You hit on so many important points there. One that does get overlooked in policy oftentimes is the question of data collection and disaggregating data. So, and you can use Section 1071 of the Dodd-Frank Act as an illustration of that. That was passed a decade ago, and yet we still don't have implementation of that data collection rule. Although they, I think, now have an interim rule that is ready to be finalized, but I think it's outrageous that it's taken 10 years to implement this. I want to also just ask the same question to Jessica as far as long-standing inequities when it comes to capital access. What has your research shown?
Yeah, I think primary for us, as well as data collection and disaggregation. So we can rely on stories and information from people kind of living out experiences, but to a large part, people aren't necessarily, when it comes to issues of discrimination, people aren't willing necessarily to trust stories. people need to see what is actually happening, and they need to be able to see it at scale. And so I think there is like, I don't think that we could emphasize that point enough, that we need to collect and disaggregate and, in my opinion, report out, like be transparent about what is actually happening, because that will help us to get a better understanding of where exactly the problems are and how we might address them. I'm actually really excited that the Biden administration is going to be dealing with data in their racial equity kind of initiatives, because I think that's going to allow us a lot more space to see some key problem points and make some adjustments. I also think that we need to do a better job at targeting resources to the folks who need them the most. And like, we need to be providing flexible funding and making sure that we're getting it to folks in ways that is meaningful to them, right? Like that it matters that we're giving it to you. If we have a program like the Paycheck Protection Program that only goes to folks who have employees, then we're not really helping everybody, right? And so being mindful about how programs are structured, how we're determining eligibility, whether or not we're like figuring out who's able to like collecting the data to figure out who's able to take advantage of the program, and also like thinking about the other side of the program, right? Like, we're not yet sure who's been able to have their loans forgiven, right? So we may actually have a number of businesses with loans on their books that, you know, are going to be detrimental to them in the future. And so I think that's another thing that we need to be thinking about. One of the things that came up in the Reimagine Main Street survey that I mentioned earlier, the majority of businesses said that what would be most helpful to them is grants. And so, like, yes, we're in a world where there are trade-offs and we don't have infinite resources, but we do have the resources to provide support to small businesses, and we need to make sure that as we're thinking about how to help, that we're considering grants kind of in that mix. And I think finally, one of the things that came up quite a bit in this conversation is this technical assistance point. Making sure that there are trusted, that we're using the institutions that people already trust to provide the assistance that folks need is going to be key. We can't, like, trust is more of a one-to-one thing than kind of saying like, well, we will give this money to this big bank and you should know that they're trusted because they're a big bank and we know that they'll do right with our money. Like, individuals need to be able to trust who they're working with, especially if they're putting their business in this person's hands, right? And so I think making sure that we are taking the time to invest in the institutions that people already trust is going to be key. They're going to be a key next step to get out of this.
Thanks, Jessica. And just want to connect the points that you made and ReShonda made around data, both data collection, but as you pointed to, data reporting, data publication, data transparency. Per ReShonda's point about filing a lawsuit with the CFPB, it took a lawsuit for SBA to publish last fall information about the Paycheck Protection Program, which then showed that the amount of funding overwhelmingly went to larger businesses that were well connected to the banking industry. So we really need to return to a government that not only collects quality data, but then shares that data publicly so that taxpayers and American citizens and small businesses can hold these programs accountable. And also I saw Kriss nodding in agreement when you spoke about the need for grants to small businesses. And I just want to give her a chance to weigh in on that as well.
Well, of course, we all want more grants, but I think when it comes to small business, we really need to look at small businesses. And in rural places, I'm going to include small and medium scale farms as part of the small business landscape. Without those businesses as the brick and mortar foundations of our communities, there's just no reason to live here. And it's a shame to waste the institutional memory and the knowledge in these communities and neighborhoods. And I do think that an infusion of grants at this time, we've seen giant bailouts at the top, and it makes us feel forgotten and bitter when we see our bars and restaurants closing down on Main Street. I love that we're talking about data so much here in the country. One thing we do know that has been proven and disseminated is that women farmers and farmers from communities of color are denied access to the same government programs that their male majority counterparts have been taking advantage of for years. And there are multiple programs. I've been a part of them, outreach to women farmers, and that has had meaning, been meaningful, and made a change. And so I think that I think we almost need to look at community organizing as outreach for these programs. We're talking about trusted institutions, trusted people. Here in the country, we do trust our community banks, but we don't trust the government. So there's little differences in attitude, but who we really trust are our neighboring farmers or small business owners who have tapped into programs. So I think creating meaningful networks among communities of women and minority business owners, that is probably what's going to have the most meaning. And so I love the work that you all are doing. I'm part of a group called the Soil Sisters, and we do the same. We help each other find those pathways in to access the equipment and the capital and the partners that we need.
Thanks, Kriss. And I want to move on. As if small businesses don't have enough on their plates right now, I want to move to the subject of competition. As COVID continues to wipe out so many small businesses around the country, large corporations, on the other hand, are profiting and growing exponentially off the crisis, taking advantage of years of weak antitrust enforcement, which is threatening both the recovery and long-term viability of Main Street. In important progress, however, last fall, the majority staff for the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Antitrust released a report that included recommendations related to competition in digital markets. Main Street Alliance supports action to reinvigorate antitrust enforcement, including returning antitrust agencies to their original focus on market structures, strengthening merger policy, and adopting legislation to strengthen antitrust policy, as well as closing corporate tax loopholes and breaking up other tech giants. ReShonda, how do corporate entities not paying their fair share in taxes affect small businesses from your perspective?
Definitely. So there's always the issue of having a level playing field between the large corporations and small businesses. And when you look at the tax loopholes that are there for corporations, these large corporations, to take their businesses offshore and pay lower tax rates there, and of course, just lower expenses overall, small businesses, there's no way I could take a business, offshore in order to avoid paying higher taxes or higher wages. You also have just the offshoring of funds that corporations hide their profits so that they're not having to pay taxes. Well, we don't have that benefit. And so as we're trying to level the playing field, we're not even on the same field. We're nowhere close to being on that same field. So there's no way to level it when, we're here, we're in our communities, we're paying our fair share of taxes. We are paying our neighbors to work for us. If we are able to have a business, that actually has employees. And so we're here, we're in the communities, we're trying to support the community that we live in. We're trying to make sure that everyone is able to, at the end of the day, eat, that everyone is able to pay their rent, their mortgage. We're trying to make sure that people have access to affordable health insurance. We're trying to do all of these things, yet we're bringing in less money than the big companies, for one. We don't have basically these too big to fail type of policies that support us. And then, then secondly, we just don't have the advantages. And then we don't have this legal and tax team that's there to make sure that every little bitty avoidance, they're not evading, they're avoiding, they're legally avoiding. And so we don't have that. We have someone, who probably does our taxes and says, hey, did you, make sure that you had this expense or that expense, but just that deep dive into the daily of how do we avoid paying taxes. I mean, for years, you've had companies where like Amazon and GE and Verizon, just these different companies that like literally they've had to pay no federal income taxes because they're able to legally avoid them. And there's just no way, for small businesses to be able to compete in an environment like that.
Very well said, ReShonda. I would just maybe put a pin on the fact that even though small business owners can't afford to have tax lawyers who know how to manipulate the tax code, it's also just not in their value system. It's not in their DNA to try and game the system. And so, it really goes to the heart of the values question of small business communities and what they care about. Kriss, how do you see monopolies playing out in your rural area?
Well, obviously, ag consolidation is the most catastrophic trend that has hit rural communities. Over the past couple decades, we see a hollowing out of our school districts and our main streets and our community organizations because of the consolidation of agriculture. And obviously, policy drives that. Federal policy drives that more than anything. And then in COVID, we've seen a whole nother landscape take shape where the Walmarts have made a killing and the corner grocery stores have gone out of business. And that's just not fair. It's demoralizing, and it continues to breed that attitude of distrust of the government that we have. We believe that the government props up the big guys and lets us fail. And I think that the data backs that up. And it's a waste. It's a waste of Main Street buildings. It's a waste of school buildings. But we can't keep people here if we can't keep jobs and internet. I don't want to get started on broadband, but what we have done with broadband provision in America and in Wisconsin is allow the telecoms to define the terms. And so we don't have a reliable network of internet to every last farm and even to every last business because it's not profitable for the monopolists to give us service. But it should be a public utility. And that is another issue that is maybe not unique to rural communities, but we have families schooling their kids at home, working from home, running business from home, trying to crowd all of that usage onto a tiny little line or a fragile satellite connection. And that is a huge inequity that most people probably don't think about. We're just not working with the same deck of cards as a lot of other people are. And that is demoralizing. And what it really does is squash innovation. You were talking about value systems. The value system behind entrepreneurship is unique and special and should be should be nurtured from grade school on. That's what causes the churn and the excitement and the progress in our economies. But if you can't get internet at your home to do homework, and you're sitting in the library parking lot to get your homework done, and now you're sitting in the library parking lot to get your whole school day done, if your school has come out of session because of COVID rates, you don't have time to nurture that spark of innovation and entrepreneurship that's so special, and that we really rely on. So there's a real loss of brain, a real loss of talent when you don't have basic tools.
Thank you so much for reminding all of us about the broadband access barriers, I think is putting it mildly. In fact, I'd love for you to share the story you shared with me yesterday about how you're convening meetings as a rural county supervisor due to the lack of access to internet service.
Well, local governments, especially in sparse areas, we're a county of 16,000 people. So we're also the most ag-dependent county in the state of Wisconsin. And so because we have land use value assessment that gives agriculture a break when it comes to paying property, taxes on property, we don't have a big pot of money. We have 2 IT professionals that run our county meetings, but they run the county infrastructure, the actual wires that go under the street from one county building to another. And when we have meetings, we sometimes need to have a blend of in-person. We're largely meeting in person, but sometimes people have COVID or they can't get in, or they don't feel comfortable, they're older. We are having blends of in-person and online meetings. And that may seem like a no-brainer if you're in a larger business or in a bigger city, but we really struggle to even hook up the tools. So our economic developer is currently our county's parliamentarian, our IT on the spot person trying to help people learn how to use new tools, Zoom and phone access. And it's just made it so that 1, it's hard to get government done, but 2, the public can't keep an eye on what's going on at this point. And there's a lot of problems with open meetings law in terms of people being able to watch what's going on in government right now, because it's a very shifting landscape in terms of where meetings are actually happening. We have 1 room in the county that's big enough to have us spread out. And so all of the county full board meetings and committee meetings have to occur in 1 room that is actually at the highway department that's big enough to have meetings in. So it's just even tough to schedule.
I think your earlier point about the need for this to be a public utility ought to resonate with policymakers, because this is an issue that not only affects rural areas like yours, but also communities of color that had to shift over to remote learning and were not connected to the internet in order to learn and participate. So, but we can spend another hour talking about broadband access. I will say that it's been a talking point for the Biden-Harris administration's economic team that's coming in. So I do expect that this will be one of the priorities at the top of their agenda. We have about 10 minutes left, and so I do want to allow our audience to participate and pose questions to the panel. We have a question here going back to childcare. How would you prioritize getting children back to school full-time as one of the ways to allow women to get back to work or running their businesses? Who would like to take that first?
I'm happy to respond, though I will say I'm dodging the question a little bit. The thing that is most challenging to me there is that, like, I am not a public health expert. I can say what would be best for the economy. would be to, well, in some ways, the way to get women back to work is to make sure that they're able to work, right? And so what that may mean, or to make sure that they're able to um, earn money to stay home and take care of their children, right? So like there is a, if what we want to do is solve the problem that women are unable to earn money right now because they have childcare responsibilities, we could pay them to stay at home and take care of their children. Like that is a job that they are doing and we could pay for it. Um, if we want to limit ourselves to like, should kids have to go back to school or not? I'm less able to engage there because I think there's some public health questions that like I just don't know the answer to, and I'm staying home. So I would not expect other people to have to go to work.
And as we've talked about the care economy in the conversation earlier, they're just having better paid leave policies in order to make sure that moms or dads, you know, whoever is able to stay home, take care of the kids until it's safe for them to actually be back in person full time. Because if we push it too soon, we risk a public health dilemma. However, you know, there have to be choices made. And it's like, well, do I pay, you know, for someone to take care of my child when I really don't have the means to, or do I go to work? Like, how do I handle this? And so it's so tough. But if we had just a better paid leave policy, that would solve a lot of problems.
Thank you, ReShonda. And not to get too deep into the policy weeds, but you know, as part of the CARES Act that was passed last spring, a mandatory paid leave program was established for those affected by COVID-19. However, the mandate was allowed to lapse as part of the last COVID relief bill that was passed at the end of the year, which is a huge gap, if not nothing else, for the mere fact that COVID is still raging right now, and small business owners and their employees need that paid leave protection. So Main Street Alliance is actively working to not just reinstate what was in the Families First program passed last spring, but also to work towards a permanent solution on a federal paid leave policy, which I think we'd all agree is long overdue. I don't see any other questions.
I have one more question. Didier.
Okay, great.
Absolutely. This is a question I get asked a lot, speaking with media and reporters kind of across the country. And given we're talking about priority setting, a lot of times the question comes up around the emergency that's happening right now versus some of the long-term, you know, as you said, permanent solutions. Is, in terms of priority setting, how do we sort of square what we think we need to see in the long term and what needs to happen right now? Or is that a false question? Are they connected?
I could speak to that from a rural perspective. We were already struggling before COVID. We were already bleeding farm families, bleeding school families. And so for us, COVID feels a little bit like an opportunity. I think people saw the supply chains crash. They looked to farmers and realized what a tough spot they were in. And for us rurally, we realized, wow, we aren't commuting right now. It would be great to shop at our local businesses, but there's none left. And so I think that this is really an opportunity to reset the priorities away from chasing smokestacks and toward building that brick and mortar Main Street small business infrastructure. I think they're kind of the same. The short term and the long term can be almost the same.
I'll just say, I absolutely agree. I just believe that COVID just highlighted some of the things that we already knew and we were experiencing, and things that we knew needed to happen long term. But COVID is putting a light on them to say, hey, you know, we really do need these things. You know, as we fought for healthcare for, you know, the last decade, it's how actually Main Street Alliance came about, is over the whole healthcare deal. And I mean, that's been a fight, and we're in the middle of a pandemic. People have lost jobs, they've lost healthcare, and that's the fault of us as a nation. We shouldn't be in this situation anyway, because we should make sure that we're taking care of our people. And so a lot of the things that COVID has highlighted have been things that, you know, we've needed long term all along.
And this is sort of fits very nicely into this next question from Bloomberg Business Week, talking about what you're feeling about 2021 and not only dealing with the pandemic in this past year, but what your future, you know, planning, hiring, seeking grants and loans looks like.
Who would like to jump in? Go ahead, ReShonda.
I'll just jump in. I'll say COVID actually has been something that, as Kriss said, is almost like an opportunity for some areas of small business. So there are organizations that are saying, oh, this is a problem. You know, we need to actually probably infuse capital into some of these minority and low income areas and rural areas. And so there's more grant opportunities out there. And I mean, I'm totally fortunate to be able to work with a lot of small business owners in the area and have connection with the Small Business Development Center and the SBA in Iowa, so that a lot of these programs and grant opportunities I'm able to be aware of and point other small businesses to say, hey, you know, this is out there now, you should try and apply for it, you know, and just kind of going through a lot of the things that are there now that were not there before, and just helping people to take advantage of things that they didn't have opportunities for before.
I agree. I think if we can get people on the ground from SBA networking with small business idea folks, that we could see a real renaissance in some of our communities that have been kind of becoming a little thin on businesses. I know that we've had a lot of businesses close in our region, but we've had quite a few open in COVID and do amazing because they're lean, mean. Their business plans are honed. They've done a lot of thinking, and they're those innovators that we want to monetize and make sure they get access to capital. So I think now is the time to lean into small business, because a lot of people are thinking, what is the opportunity? There's 5 empty storefronts in my neighborhood. You know, what's the opportunity now?
Okay, well, I think we are almost at time. I don't see any additional questions. I do want to give all of you a chance to make any closing remarks if you'd like. Obviously, there are a lot of common threads that go well beyond geography, as we've heard today. But would anyone like to make any closing remarks before we wrap up?
I think the thing that I'd like to emphasize is the importance of listening to folks who are having the experiences as we think about how to craft policy. Like, there are a lot of missteps that could have been avoided, and in some ways, COVID highlighted some things that people have been saying for years. And it's just an important reminder that people know what would be helpful to them. They know what would not be helpful, and they will share if you ask. So I think that's like the thing that I hope that policymakers learn from this experience.
Thanks, Jessica. Kriss?
I just like to remind folks that people are exhausted from working so hard to pivot and make things work, package differently. have put in all kinds of protocols and be their own health care professionals, because public health has been so impoverished for so many years in so many of our states that there really isn't. People kind of had to be their own, write their own policies. And so people are tired. I think there are a lot of folks who are worth infusing with help, but let's streamline the process and not have so many barriers to accessing help.
And ReShonda, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely echo that, Kriss. And Jessica, listening, policymakers actually listening, squashing all of this, partisan type of a deal, and actually caring about the everyday people that you were hired to represent. That's key. Who cares about your party? It's about the people, and taking care of our people well. There's nothing more important than making sure that each one of us, our neighbors, that all of us are taken care of. And so our policymakers just need to understand, they need to listen to us, and they need to make sure that they're taking care of us instead of their policy or their partisan agenda.
Thank you so much, ReShonda. Could not have been said any better. This has been an incredibly rich discussion. Unfortunately, we only have an hour. So in closing, as negotiations continue on a much needed COVID rescue package, it cannot be overstated, as we've heard today, how urgent it is to make a robust investment in our small business economy, especially for those small businesses hit hardest by COVID and those that continue to be systematically left out of our relief programs. A short-term response will only prolong the recovery process for small businesses that are still hanging on. Just a quick walk down memory lane. We went through a deep recession less than 15 years ago, and small businesses, especially new entrepreneurs, were the driving force of that economic recovery. In fact, the fastest growing sector of entrepreneurs were Black women. Let's make sure small businesses are adequately supported with the policies, systems, and technical assistance they need to drive that recovery again. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and look forward to continuing the conversation in the days and weeks ahead. And thanks to everyone else who was able to join us today.